This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah, that's good. All right, everybody, welcome to our fourth learning community this year. And you guys all know the deal, so I don't have to explain what the QEP is, which is awesome. We might have some names today, but yeah, so I'm going to talk about the Meaningful Writing Project, which was a study where they asked some open-ended questions to students at 3 different institutions about, what writing experiences were meaningful to them and why. And then they coded all of that qualitative data, and then, came up with some themes that they saw that were really powerful in student writing, or in students' experiences with writing. So I'm going to share some of that. I don't have a whole lot, but I tried to really condense it down to hopefully spend like less than half the time kind of talking about this, and then the rest of the time just kind of having an open discussion about your experiences with writing assignments, how you try to make them meaningful for students, like the feedback you've got from students, really just kind of open-ended. So that didn't work. Okay. There we go. So this is an infographic that shows kind of some of the key findings of the study. And I know it's hard to read, so I'll point out some of the big takeaways. So there were 707 surveys from 3 different schools, and that was surveys of students, and then 160 faculty were surveyed, and then those lower numbers, 27 and 60, were the one-on-one interviews they did with the people who responded, and they found that more than 1 in 3 students described personal connection as a reason why their project was meaningful. So that's going to be a big thing that I'm focusing on today. Some other findings that I think were pretty cool too is if you look at the top right, so 52% wrote their meaningful writing project in their major, and 52% wrote it in a required course. So just thinking about the work we've been doing with the QEP of, really paying attention to writing in those upper level classes, I think that's just a really good opportunity for our students to have those meaningful experiences when they're ready to go out into the world. And there's also, let's see, I can barely read it, I'm right here. So on those little pie charts, 79% said that the project they described as meaningful, they had not written anything similar before. So I thought that was really interesting, is that, it was something that was challenging for the students that they found meaningful. I usually think, they're gonna like it if it's easier, but not the case in these findings. And then the project described as meaningful, they were asked if there were ways that writing would contribute to the types of writing they hope to do in the future, and 69%, yeah, 69% said yes. So, and then nearly half the students surveyed wrote their meaningful writing project in their senior year. So yeah, those were like the big takeaways for me, is that, personal connection was a big part of it, and seeing, their writing affecting them in their future and their careers, that they're kind of looking towards in their senior years. So these were the 4 key themes of the assignments that students found meaningful. So one was tapping into the power of personal connection, and I'll get into that in a more granular way a little bit later. Another was to immerse themselves in what they're thinking, writing, and researching. The third was to experience what they're writing as applicable and relevant to the real world. So with that, I think of like real life genres, or, you know, something where they're maybe writing about their careers, or writing about people in that career. And then the last one is imagining their future selves, which again kind of connects with, you know, what kind of senior level students are thinking about when they're working on those writing projects. Any comments or questions? Okay, so one thing they did with the study is they had students name the faculty who assigned their meaningful writing project, and they surveyed and interviewed those faculty, and many of the faculty who were named by the students said that they deliberately included those last four elements I talked about in their assignment, and that they built the assignment around the students' career goals and passions. And then here's a quote from one of those faculty members. In my writing assignment, the student is not forced to answer any specific question I pose to them, but rather they're encouraged to see connections between their own interests and the subject, and subsequently to explore said connection. So yeah, it's kind of like the personal isn't necessarily, you know, personal. It's more, where do their interests intersect with the assignment, being aware of that. So yeah, this is just emphasizing it doesn't necessarily mean more personal writing or narrative writing, and that the personal elements may not even be visible in the writing itself. You know, they may not use I, they may not actually be revealing details of their life. They might just have personal interests that intersect with the topic. But what I've seen with a lot of Spalding assignments that we've been collecting is, for the QEP, is that there are a lot of people that are including reflective writing as a part of as a major part of their courses, where students are including personal elements in the writing. And I think that's great too, but it's just not necessarily the case in what they found in this study. So for the aspects of personal connection that students found meaningful, 46% were individual factors. So the way they connected to their development as writers, their sense of authorship, their vision of future writing or identities, and their desire for self-expression and individual experiences. 16% were social factors. So that's where you kind of see like their culture coming into play in their communities. 26% were factors that straddled social and individual and showed where students' interests intersected with the subject of writing and how important they thought that writing was. And then 45% who found personal connection was important in their meaningful writing projects mentioned having a choice in topic. They used the word choice or allow. So I think, yeah, anything where there's a little bit of wiggle room for students to kind of personalize the topic to what they're interested in was shown to be really positive. So they also talk about transactional writing, and that in previous studies, like large studies, there was a study where they looked at 70,000 NESI responses, so the National Survey of Student Engagement. where students comment on their writing experiences and their general university experiences. So they cited several studies like that show that for the most part, the assignments were transactional rather than meaningful to students. And these are the different ways that those studies kind of combine or describe transactional writing. And in the references, you can go to that 2019 article and it's got like a really nice flip review of all these studies. But one was teaching academic writing conventions as the sole focus. So of course, like, you know, you're always teaching academic writing conventions as well as other aspects of the assignment, but if the only focus is just master this genre, and there's not really a focus on content or connection. Another aspect was being informative rather than persuasive, which kind of relates to the next one of reciting course content rather than creating new connections. So that kind of idea that they're regurgitating course content. Treating the instructor evaluator as a primary or only audience member. That's another thing that I think the QED has helped with a lot is including peer review in all these writing intensive courses so that the instructor is not seen as the only audience member. I think it's important to have, for students to have, you know, the paper feels more important to them if they have that sense of audience, that, you know, it's more than just the person who's grading them that they're writing for. And then finally, promoting the idea that academic discourse is based on reason alone and feelings and opinions must not play a role. So I thought this was interesting, and some people, you know, might have an issue with that idea, but I don't know, like you guys would know better than I do, you know, publishing in your fields and everything, but I thought there had been more of a move in scholarship to not kind of erase the I and to, you know, it's okay to do a little bit of, I think, research. I think Robin, maybe you taught me that term, research. So yeah, you know, the idea that old model that, you know, reason and objectivity have to triumph over subjective experiences, and you know, you don't have to erase the writer.
I was going to say too, Lizzy, one of the earlier items there about reciting course content rather than creating new connections. I'm teaching a capstone course right now for undergraduate seniors, and one of the things they really struggle with is that move from just gathering a lot of sources and summarizing them to actually having an argument or a new way of thinking about this. And I've had several students say to me, well, I hope there's already been a lot of stuff written about this. You know, when they're looking, and I'm like, but actually it might be a good thing if there hasn't been a lot written about it, because that means you're having this, you're making this original connection. And yes, it makes your research a little more challenging, but it's actually where you want to be moving. And so I think helping students move from that, I'm just taking what's been done and summarizing that to actually trying to create new connections.
And then this is my last slide here. So some of the unintended consequences of transactional writing is subjugating students' discourse communities and lived experiences, which also links to kind of missing the opportunity to foster inclusive pedagogy. There's been a lot lately, I think, especially for, you know, things like including Black English or African American English as a dialect that's accepted in academic writing and stuff like that. Yeah.
Another unintended consequence is one that I just ran across morning. And instead of discussions, I've started doing more key takeaways for students. And I'm just going to look at the reading and what are the major ideas. And the best ones are ones that where they'll give me that, but they'll also talk about how I'm surprised them to hear that, or how it might apply in their life. And so when I write this assignment going forward, I'm going to make sure to have them include that personal connection to it, because when they don't, I feel like I'm getting marketing material. And I can go out and look it up on the web. So they're copy and pasting off of the internet and just giving me back some key points. But there's absolutely no connection there. And I had to give feedback today, it's like, your stuff sounded so much like marketing material that I'm easily able to go out and find it verbatim.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't want students to do that. I want them to actually tell me what they did get what insights they got from reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And then that gets into like, plagiarism too. Students are probably less likely to plagiarize when they do have to insert some of their, personal interests into it, any sort of assignment that, isn't going to match a cookie cutter, essay they can buy online or, just copy from a website.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that was on an earlier slide, I think it was one of the 4 areas of focus from the study was immersive. And I think that's what, for me, one of the takeaways I have from the QEP is not just giving I still do give sometimes small standalone writing assignments, but to actually try as much as possible to make this just a piece of what, like a piece that you're going to build on later. And I think the peer review that we have and so many faculty have been using and the drafts and scaffolding, it really makes you kind of immerse yourself in thinking and writing about that. And the other thing that I've seen students in some of my classes realizing is that as they start to write about this and they redraft and they actually change what they're thinking. What they started thinking is not what they end up thinking. And so I think for some of them, that's a real aha moment that it's okay to keep working on this, immerse yourself, and then, yeah, your thoughts about it might change as you go along. So, yeah, I think that immersing piece is important too. And so I try really hard with those small assignments to make sure students know why they're doing it. I'm not just asking you to do this because I'm just giving you something to do, but there's really, this will be something that you can use for a later assignment. This will be something you can use when you, go out into the workplace or something like that, just to give them that why. I think that helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's before they have any skin in the game. Like once they've written a whole paper, the tendency is I'm going to commit to this viewpoint because I've already done it. Like that resistance to revising something they've completed already. Yeah. So let me switch over. I was going to quickly go to the reference page here and just point out that we have the articles that are starred or the references that have the little asterisks, the engaged writers and dynamic disciplines, as well as the book that they published on the Meaningful Writing Project are both located in the CTL collection, in the CTL lounge on the 3rd floor. So you can check those out. And then the 2 articles that they published based on this study, I included the links to our website because we have those articles posted there as well as other information. I was thinking, rather than switching to the webcam, which probably is going to catch 2 people, that I might just leave the PowerPoint up so we can reference it if we need to, especially this early slide. So yeah, just opening up the conversation, my first thought is kind of like, what are your reactions to this data? Like, does anything kind of rub you the wrong way? Or were a lot of the things kind of like, yeah, I already do that, or that makes sense? Just curious kind of reactions to it.
I think the feelings, including feelings, is very disciplined. Because in science, you would not express your feeling on something. Right? And I haven't even seen a shift that's going that direction. Now you could say, based on, this evidence, we hypothesize or we can ask questions, but you would never say, so I agree that in certain disciplines that should be included. So, I think that was the only part that's like, that might not work in science, but I think so much of this is really good things for faculty to consider when they're writing their assignments. Because it isn't, nobody wants busy work. And if a student thinks it's busy work, like, they're not going to put in the effort, and then you're grading the paper that's not very good. I know that then comes up, but I love when they like the assignment, because then they put more effort and it's a nicer piece, and they're proud of it, and I'm proud of it. I can grade them really quickly because they're just so, it shows that they have put in that extra piece of effort. And that's good for everyone, right?
And you give them options on topic too.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I mean, within a range, but lots of different options.
Other general reactions?
Yeah, I would say, I was just going to say, communication too. I appreciate what you're saying there, Jennifer, because I don't think there has really been a move to include yourself or your feelings in research. However, I have seen some moves, because I know when I went through my graduate program, we were told you never research something that is a personal connection to you, because you will have a bias. You'll have a bias, but I have seen a real shift in the field to be much more accepting of that idea. That if you've had an illness, for instance, it's okay for you to research, people who have that illness. And so that's been a change that I think is reflective of that personal connection. It's okay to have that connection. You still try to present, depending on what you're doing, you try to present it in very, removed, I guess, terms. But there's also the rise of autoethnography and ethnography, and some of that in communication where probably 10 to 15 years ago, it was just not, it was a side, not acceptable kind of thing. And I think it has become more, more acceptable. So yeah, I see some of those moves in the field. But I do sometimes really struggle with student writing that, if they do include personal pronouns and things like, it's still, I have to debate with myself where I think they're going in their career and whether or not that would be appropriate where they're going. Because if they were going into a PhD program, no, it's probably not. But many of our students are not going that direction. They're going into something else. So, yeah. That's it.
When I started seeing we use those big journals in marketing, I'm like, okay, I'm not fighting that battle anymore.
Yeah.
They're not giving a personal opinion, but they're as the researchers, blah, 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 blah. They could say me, and I started seeing that. Okay, we and I did this.
I was going to say, like, a lot of what you're saying also feeds into this idea, like, deciding, like, are you just teaching students to master academic discourse, which I think has always been a focus, even at the undergraduate level, but then, is that really helpful to them if they're not going to graduate school? So then it's that question of like, how do you think about career-based writing or writing that's going to help their development and understanding of their discipline rather than kind of training academic writers. That's such a hard thing to straddle.
And I think that's why it's important to have different writing assignments. So a writing assignment would be kind of, how to write a professional letter or a professional opinion kind of piece, and then how to write more of the academic piece. Because you would, anybody would write differently depending on what they are writing for. And so I think, that's good for students to see too, that you write differently depending on what the writing goal is.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's interesting to think about what this would look like with each kind of grade level or each course level. So my perspective is teaching SB 100, which is one of the first classes that it is the first class, in their first semester. So the way that we do kind of immersing themselves in what they're thinking, writing, researching is we require them to use the campus resources, which might not be something that you have a senior do, but it helps them kind of feel tied to the campus, and kind of make those resources less scary. But what we did is this year in the class, we split SU 100 up by majors. And this year we did a research paper on an aspect of what their current kind of career goal is, and a question that they still have, or questions they still have about that major or that career. So I think hopefully, I think they all saw it as relevant, applicable, all of these things. So kind of patting ourselves on the back for that one, because I think, and then at the end we had them connect, or not connect, but reflect on what that process was like for them. Because for a lot of students, it was the first research paper they had ever written. It was the first time they written something longer than 2 pages. So it was interesting to see kind of what they thought about the process. Totally, like I didn't. It was a low bar, but I think that it really helped them to tie it really strongly to, this career, made it more real for them. So yeah, it's interesting to think about what that looks like freshman.
And I like to, I don't know if you just said it, we were talking about it earlier, and you, as part of that assignment, you have students share what they already know about the field. I think that shows too that, like, kind of that inclusive pedagogy and of like, what knowledge our students bring with them just from their lived experiences, and showing that that's important, that's valuable.
And I think I'm trying to remember, it didn't happen for a lot of students, but I think they thought some aspect of it and that they wrote about in the beginning. And then through their research, they realized they weren't totally, that aspect of it was totally true, or it was true, but only in this context. And so I think it did help them to, okay, I have to kind of question what I think I already know about this thing or this career. So I think hopefully that helps with the general shift of, because a lot of them, so for example, I work with nursing students, a lot of them want to be travel nurses, and I think that's part of social media. There's a big uptick of travel nursing TikTok videos or whatever. And so I think they're getting a lot of that information from that, but then requiring them to, I think a lot of them that would be to try to do, actual research through the database and found, substantive things aside from social media that help them understand the field a little bit better.
So then I also wanted to just kind of hear from folks about like how maybe examples of writing assignments you have and like how you try to make those assignments meaningful, or what, or even like what reactions you've seen from students. And I forgot to mention that in some of the qualitative or just the quotes they shared from students, like the students who found the projects meaningful, it doesn't mean they got an A in the project. The quotes they showed, it was like B minus, but the students who still really enjoyed writing it and really liked what they wrote. So it doesn't even have to be an assignment that students perform really well on in general. It could be challenging and therefore they're performing lower in it, but just curious to hear what assignments you found, how you kind of injected meaning into it, and how students have responded.
And maybe I'll tack on to that, like an additional question, because I'm curious. I have a good friend who is who's my age and is doing like a master's in mental health counseling, I guess. Yeah, like in a school of education, not here, somewhere else. And he was describing to me, he was like, oh yeah, we could do like these like reflective papers in one of the kind of counseling classes. And I think the idea of it is to help people kind of be aware of themselves and their own position and sort of how they've gotten doing therapy for the people or counseling. But I think he was just kind of like, it's like such a broad assignment and like it's so personal, but also like it was kind of just like write about your experiences and connect them to these questions. I don't know where to even start. It was kind of like, why are you the way you are? It was kind of like the problem. Which I would think would be like an example of a meaningful writing assignment. It is like asking you to connect your own personal experience to what you're learning and what you'll be doing in your career. But it just like hit me that it was like, yeah, that's a really, like I can imagine some of these assignments being more difficult in a lot of ways than sort of the transactional, like you do this and then you know you've done it and like you're gonna get an A because you checked off like things. So I'm also curious, I guess, if when you're assigning meaningful writing projects or things that kind of fall into this category, but like how do you kind of provide students guidance so that they kind of know that they're doing it the right way, or like, and like what is the right way mean? Like how do they know getting out of it? Or something? I don't know. I feel like when he told me about this, I was like, I have a million ideas. And like, where were it? And stuff. And I was like, that was annoying.
I kind of struggled with that in health communication class I teach. We read a book called The Wreck Become There, and it's the story of a doctor who actually is diagnosed with cancer. So the first part of the book is about his experience in medical school and when he became a doctor and the way he interacts with patients. And the second part is about now he's a patient and what that, how that changes his communication and the way people interact with him, and it gives a lot of connection to his family and the way he communicated with his family. And it's really a rich text that goes along with a lot of the things that we talk about in class. But I've really debated about how to best integrate that. And I didn't want students just to do discussion forums or just to write reflection pieces because of the very reasons we were talking about. It's like, for one thing, it can be very emotional for students who have recently lost someone from cancer or who have been through a cancer experience. It can be a very emotional read. But also, I felt like, because it is an online class, and so we couldn't sit in a classroom and talk about it together. So one of the things that I did that I think has been effective, although I'm still looking for ideas, so if anybody has any others, I'm always open, but I actually asked the students to do a short video reflection that they put up in their small group, and it's usually about 5 minutes or less, but it's like their response to some of the major things that they're taking away from the book. And so I had to do that video first, and they can watch each other's videos. And then I found that the written, the written responses they were giving me were a lot better because they had that chance to say the things they wanted to say and see what other people said and use that, even though we weren't, necessarily peer reviewing or doing anything like that, but it was like it gave them something more substantial to write from. So that's one of the things that I found. The Monday mentor this week, those of you who get the Monday notices from me about the Monday mentor video for the week, the one this week was actually on doing video in doing video responses in courses. And I think, even though it's not a written project necessarily, it still gives students a chance to think through what they want to say. And maybe gives them a chance to immerse a little more before they write. Because, if I was in a traditional in-class, we would do that. We would have some discussion before I asked them to write a reflection. But online, sometimes, it's a little more challenging.
Do they post those videos? Do other students see their videos as well?
They do. What we do in that class is I divide them into small groups of about 4 people, and they work with that small group throughout the class. So by the time we get to this, they've already had interactions with those students. So just those students in their group see their video. But actually, many of them at the end of the class have said that was the most meaningful thing that they took away. Actually creating that video themselves, seeing the ones from others.
I don't know how relevant this perspective is, but as a SOPP student, I do a lot of reflective writing. And it definitely can feel very overwhelming whenever they're just like, write about your experiences with this, and you just have to figure out where to start. So what I have tried to do is based on the number of pages they're asking for, pick out 3, 5, whatever, topics associated with whatever we're talking about that unit or that week, and try to reflect on those. But I feel like if that is embedded in the assignment, it might take out some of the ambiguity, write about, just list out any of these concepts and have that kind of I feel like that would help some people, but I mean, I've kind of found my groove with it, but it can be really overwhelming. I know when I first started, last semester, we had reflection papers after reflection papers. And I was like, how do you even begin to put all of your experiences in this 2-page paper right here? So just kind of finding specific niche avenues to go in and explore those. But I feel like if that was in the instructions, that may be helpful, if that helps in any way.
Yeah, I guess that and what Leo was describing, I think would fall into the realm of definitely personal writing, as opposed to having a personal connection to, a piece of academic writing. You have reflective writing, that's where it gets really personal. And yeah, I think that kind of navel gazing can be really difficult. What experiences do you include, which are the most compelling, when you're thinking about your audience? Yeah.
Well, and I was going to say, I think sometimes we ask students to write personal things to share with us that we wouldn't want to write. Or, when we talk about faculty sharing their materials or sharing things that they do in class, a lot of times they're really hesitant to do that. And I'm like, I understand, because I am too. But we ask students to do that all the time. So I think we have to be aware if we're asking students to write something that might be, deeply personal, or, that we're asking them to trust us with that. Might be very uncomfortable.
Well, we've run into that with peer review, where, faculty members won't want to make certain assignments, peer review assignments, because the students reveal so much about themselves in the writing. But we also see faculty members who choose to have students share those types of assignments. And I can say from teaching first year writing that even if the assignment isn't really personal writing, the students will, the way the assignment's written for that personal connection, students tend to, especially when they're first year students, the most powerful evidence for them is their personal experience, because they haven't gotten into, studying their discipline a lot. So, you see them kind of using that as evidence more. And, I'll tell students, just keep in mind, you'll be sharing this with your peers. So, make sure that you're sharing things that you're comfortable with others knowing about.
I think with social media that people are used to sharing too much these days. You know, the writing that I get from my students where I ask them about their leadership and have them take an assessment and grade whatever we're talking about around leadership. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm going to keep diary. And, you know, it's almost like they meant it. It's like they wanted the opportunity to do it. And I think it may be these same people who, you know, they are the ones who get on Facebook and tell you every time they lose a cat or something like that, you know. So I think people are just used to this disclosing almost too much about themselves.
I think the marketing on it, in my principles of marketing class, is more of an example of not always personal sharing, but having a personal connection to what you do. Because I strongly encourage them when they're picking that topic that it's something that they are either love or interested in learning more about, or because they're picking a product or a service for the most part. But as a brain, and so I find if a student's struggling to say, oh, I don't know which one to do, I feel like the project's not as good. The presentation comes across differently at the end. And so I think that's that power of the personal connection, but it's something that's not you're giving your personal story or opinion because you're trying to apply marketing concepts. I mean, so there's still that total transactional side to it, but the personal connections there in the beginning. If they keep something they really love, they want to know more about, or want to tell us about it, because they want to know.
That's how it's very likewise with biology, writing assignments, that there's some type of personal connection.
So I think that if that ability is there to allow the students to have that flexibility in picking what they're going to focus on, that helps tremendously.
Yeah, and that's like, I'll tell students that in first year writing and students I work with in the writing center that, you know, if you started a topic and you're really struggling to write it, you've already lost interest. You know, it's not too late to just switch topics, because if you're gonna have to write 5 or 6 pages on this, like, you're gonna be pulling your eyelashes out by the end of it if you stick with this topic, because you're obviously bored by it. So yeah, I think at any level, encouraging students to write about what they're interested in. Just because writing is hard, and if you're not writing about something you're interested in, you're really going to lose momentum. And your readers can see that. Like you said, like the really painful papers to read. Like,
Did this study make any distinction between writing assignments? Because in my mind, writing assignments is like an umbrella for so many different types of writing assignments. They specify like, you know, larger writing assignments, you know, because I think writing a quick paragraph is a writing assignment, right? So did they specify anything?
I don't think so. Yeah, they didn't specify in the, I'm thinking of the open-ended questions they asked the students. Like, I know they asked them for demographic details, details about the assignment. But I couldn't find anything in their findings. It might be in the book we have in the CTEL library where it really gets into the nitty gritty, but I know one of the articles mentions that that page links, you know, wasn't like a factor. So yeah, this could be the students responding to this, could be talking about any link of paper. Yeah, but like from the responses I read, like the actual like, students' quotes that they included, they seemed like they were talking about research papers.
Okay.
More of the larger. Yeah, but I don't know if that was implied by any of the survey questions. All right, so we're about 12:25. Any last thoughts?
Do you feel like this was incorporated into the writing in 109 and 110?
I think so. We really try to, we definitely try to encourage personal connection. So every 109, 110 instructor can design their own assignments. And none of these are listed as learning outcomes that they have to include. But I think for the most part, people who are teaching those courses that are immersed in like first year composition pedagogy are definitely thinking about a lot of these things. And we do a lot of what it sounds like SU 100 does, where you're trying to encourage students to think about their disciplines, like their majors they're getting into. So that kind of like imagining their future selves and trying to make it relevant to the types of writing they're going to do in the future, I think is really big. And then really like transferable writing skills. And definitely the immersing themselves. I think Donna said about scaffolding. I think that process that's used in first year writing definitely helps with kind of getting them engaged in the search process. So yeah, but I think, it's interesting that, with our QEP, it's definitely part of a larger movement. Like so many schools have these, like, and the programs have various names, writing across the curriculum, writing in the disciplines, writing enriched curriculum. But, I think there's lots of, moves being made to try to incorporate writing, meaningful writing from the first year to the senior year. And makes me proud that Spalding's doing it too. And I think, we were already doing it, but, now that peer review is a bigger part of those courses, we're maybe seeing more like audience awareness with students and, hopefully more engagement and awareness of themselves as writers.
I feel like it shows that they're not starting late at 11 p.m. the night before the day.
Yes. Yeah, that's maybe like the biggest advantage of peer review,
Right,
is that
yeah.
you're getting a draft out
Exactly.
early.
But I think this is one of the challenges in those entry-level courses, because I know from teaching effective speaking, we don't have to write a great deal, but we have them, they're choosing topics and giving presentations on them. And some of them have not yet, well, many of them, if they're true freshmen, they don't really have a view of their future self. They don't really know what they're going to need in the real world. They don't really know what they're interested in. And so a lot of times they really struggle to choose topics and to, connect. And I think that's why, and then by the time they're juniors and seniors, you are seeing, more of that ability to think that way. But yeah, sometimes we overestimate freshmen and think because they come in with a major, they already know what they want to do and they know what career path. And a lot of them.
All right, well, thank you everyone so much for coming. And I don't think we've ever had this much leftover food. Gonna have some happy GAs. Stop recording.